everyone. Welcome back to But Why the Podcast. And this episode is sponsored by Podcorn. And today we are taking a look at Half-Life. As always, I'm your host, Kate. I'm here with Adrian.
Hey, how's it going?
And Matt.
Hello.
And Adrian is going to be leading us through the world of Half-Life today.
Yeah, I'm going to be taking you on a train ride. So grit your crowbars and watch your head for head crabs. So we're talking about Half-Life. We're primarily talking about Half-Life because on March 23rd of this year, Half-Life Alyx comes out. So it might be cool to kind of jump into it because we're probably never getting Half-Life 3. So this is probably the closest we're going to get to it, unfortunately. So my intro question, Half-Life's been around for a long time, and there's lots of games and lots of mods and lots of expansions. So how many of the Half-Life games have you played in the series? Matt?
So I'm going to start off with saying when I think of Half-Life, I think of how we talk about radioactive material. So that's about how we're going with this episode. But anyways, I've played the very first one a little bit, obviously. I will say that I have played it, but I have not played these games. So that's one of those, like, gone somewhere, said, hey, check it out, this is what we're playing. I'm like, cool. And then I'm like, I'm leaving, bye. We had fun, friends. But that's about it. So I'm going to be learning a lot.
Yeah, that's great. Hopefully, I think like out of everybody on the show, I think this would be most up your alley because Gordon Freeman's just a scientist who likes theoretical physics and knows how to solve puzzles. So I thought this would be kind of up your alley.
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously it came out, and I don't know if this is necessarily peak per se, but this was kind of like my years of peak, like, sports games when they were around, because we have, like, 98, 99 with, like, the two games, and then even 2001, and between Madden, we had the 2K series and everything, and I played a ton of sports games, and so this just kind of fell to the wayside.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Late 90s, and even with Half-Life 2 comes out, a bunch of games come out in that same year, so definitely understandable. What about you, Kate?
So I played, I think it's Half-Life 2 Episode 2, the one that's in orange box. Is that the one that's in the orange box?
Well, all three of them are in orange box. So Half-Life, Half-Life 1, and Half-Life 2. Half-Life 1 is the one that's Alyx. Half-Life 2 is the one that's Gordon Freeman.
Okay, yes. Then I played 1 and 2 because they were in orange box. Because I bought the orange box for Team Fortress.
Gotcha. Makes
sense. And then, because my friends were playing it at the time. And then I was like, oh, what are these other games? And then I played those. I don't remember a lot of it. I do remember having fun. But the one thing that I remember the most was when I had started going to conventions, the head crabs were everywhere, those head crab hats. So that was kind of like the one thing I knew from Half-Life that kind of went out. That, and I remember, I think it was in college when everybody was pushing for the Where's Half-Life 3 and we're like camping out at Valve Studios and stuff like that. So that's probably a larger Half-Life memory. But no, I played 1 and 2. I think I remember more of episode 2 than I do, like, specifically. But yeah, that's kind of my experience. So a little bit in Matt's camp, but I have played through the game, so a little bit less in Matt's camp.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so for me, Half-Life is like one of like the first PC games I played because I would go over to my uncle's house and my uncle had like at that time, like one of the top of the end PCs. So I would like play Half-Life. He would let me play Half-Life and, Fear and other kinds of games on this computer. And Half-Life was one of my first computer FPS games. And obviously I played Half-Life 2 when it came out as well. And the orange box is like a big part of that too, because when I got my own PC, he got me the orange box and I played through episode 1, episode 2 of Half-Life 2, and then going back and playing the old Half-Lives because that also has expansions. So I've played Half-Life quite a bit. I'm not in the let's camp out at Valve for Half-Life 3 camp because that's just kind of insane. And if you're one of those people, I'm sorry, but like they can't count to 3, man.
It's all just insane. It's all just insane. I don't apologize. Why are you doing that?
Yeah, it's fine. Like, if they don't want to make the game, they're not going to make the game. And even if they made the game at this point, like, would they even like it in this gaming culture? There's no way they would like it.
That is fair. Like, at this point, they have waited for it for so long. If Valve said, we're making Half-Life 3, it would come out, and so many people would just be mad.
Yeah, they would just be mad. So this is why we're getting Half-Life Alyx, like a prequel to Half-Life 2, basically. But we'll kind of talk about there at the end. So the production history of Half-Life is kind of a but why though in itself. So it's like, because the production history is kind of interesting of how well Valve hits with their very, very first game. and just all the stuff that spawns after it. So if you're not familiar with Half-Life in and of itself, Half-Life is a series of first-person shooter games developed and published by Valve. In most installments, players control Gordon Freeman, a physicist who battles an alien invasion. The games combine shooting combat, puzzles, and storytelling together. The series primarily consists of Half-Life 1 and Half-Life 2, but each of them have their own expansions, so you basically have more than just those two games. So 1998, you have Half-Life. 1999, you have Half-Life Opposing Forces. 2001, you have Half-Life Blue Shift and Half-Life Decay, which is a multiplayer version of Half-Life. In 2004, you have Half-Life Source. Half-Life 2 comes out, and Half-Life 2 Deathmatch. 2005, Half-Life 2 Lost Coast, which is like a lost story kind of thing. They kind of cut story from Half-Life 2, so they just gave you that as an expansion. In 2006, Half-Life Team Deathmatch Source and Half-Life 2 Episode 1.
Hold on. Half-Life Deathmatch Source. That's a name?
Yeah, it's named primarily because Source is the name of their engine that they use to make Half-Life 2. So I think they just went with like, let's put Source in everything. That's why we have Counter-Strike Source.
That makes sense now.
Yeah. And then
like Unreal Tournament, but with Source.
Exactly. And then in 2007, you have Half-Life 2 Episode 2, like Kate kind of talked about that she played. And then later this month, March 23rd, 2020, we have Half-Life 2 Alyx, which is the virtual reality game, which we'll kind of talk about later on, very kind of quickly, because it's exciting, but like, is it really that exciting?
No.
Because I can't play it.
I'm going to straight up say no.
So Half-Life itself was Valve's first game. And if you're familiar with Valve, you know that Valve is the people who do Steam and like all of the games that spawn off of that. So Valve would basically carry the company to create other staples like Day of Defeat, Portal, Counter-Strike, Team Fortress, Dota, Artifact, and Left 4 Dead. Again, we're still waiting for Left 4 Dead 3. I'll camp out for that one.
Take.
Yeah, I'll camp out for that one.
We're talking about people are still waiting to see if Artifact's actually going to work.
Oh no.
Yeah. Imagine waiting for Artifact 3. You can't even get Artifact 1.
There's somebody camped out right now.
It might be Artifact 3.0 to try to hopefully that patches fix that shit.
So interestingly enough, like Half-Life 1's development has like much of it's been lost in detail, because according to employee Eric Johnson, 2 or 3 months before release, their visual source safe exploded, and logs of technical changes before the game's final development were lost, and code had to be recovered from individual computers. So a lot of like the early versions of Half-Life like just don't exist anymore. But
it's
we
like
still have
NASA.
basically. But we still do have some really cool stuff that went into the making of the game that I think is a testament to how well it does. So Valve is based in Kirkland, Washington, and was founded 2 years before Half-Life comes out in 1996 by former Microsoft employees Mike Harrington and Gabe Newell. And then for its first product, Valve settled on a concept of a horror first-person shooter using Quake's engine. So the game takes a lot of inspiration. It was initially inspired by Doom in 1993 and Quake in 1996, again using Quake's engine to make the game, and Stephen King's 1980 novella The Mist, which I thought Kate would like because I know how much you love The Mist.
Yes.
Which, like, going back and thinking about it, I was like, yeah, this is kind of misty, actually.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And a 1963 episode of The Outer Limits titled The Borderland. According to designer... Yeah, see, it all comes together, right?
Yeah, I'm connecting dots in my head.
Yeah, so Doom was a major influence, and the team wanted Half-Life to scare you like Doom did. The project had a working title of Quiver around the Arrowhead military base from The Mist. The name Half-Life was chosen because it was evocative of the theme, not cliched, and had a corresponding visual symbol, the Greek letter lambda, which, again, Matt, see, look, they're thinking about you, with Half-Life stuff, because it represents the decaying constant of, obviously, the Half-Life equation.
Which is kind of what I said at the beginning.
Yeah.
When I think about Half-Life.
So, according to designer Brett Johnson, the level design was inspired by environments in the manga series Akira. So, lots of different elements to this game outside of just kind of getting out of that Doom clone phase that we'll talk about a little bit later. They took a lot of inspiration from, horror books, from manga to Greek letters, lots of stuff there.
Yeah.
As is with many things when it comes to Valve, they aimed for an earlier release but just didn't quite make it. So they aimed for a November 1997 release to compete with Quake 2, but by September 1997 the team found that they had built innovative aspects in weapons, enemies, and level design, but the game still wasn't where they wanted it to be, so they pushed it back for an entire year. And they took a relatively novel approach to assigning a small team to build a prototype level containing every element in the game, and then spent months working on that level. So they really did take their time into making it and didn't want to push it out too early. And I think that I thought was really great about how they're making this game is the team took 3 different theories on how to make the game fun. First, they had several interesting things happen triggered by the player rather than a timer. So for a lot of games we have when we talked about Halo, Halo runs on that 30-second timer where you can stand there, but every 30 seconds something's going to happen depending on how fast you're moving through the game. But they wanted the game to follow much more of the player pace to kind of give you that sense of kind of you are the person who's running the game rather than the game is running you. Second, the level responded to any player action, even for something as simple as adding graphic details to the walls for bullet impact. So when you shoot the wall, something happens. When you pick up a can and throw it across the wall, it'll kind of tingle along. So there's that immersion factor outside of the enemies. You interacting with the environment is also a big part of it. And then finally, the level warned players of imminent danger, allowing them to avoid it rather than killing the player without any warning. So the music and the sounds of the game is really, really important. So it's more than just kind of running and killing things. It's more focusing in on how the game runs, which is how they make the game more fun than just taking a shotgun and blowing off a demon's face like you do in other games, which is fun, of course, definitely fun. But they definitely were trying to go at it from a different angle to make it more fun.
No, I
So
do
no-
Oh, what
Go ahead.
I was gonna say. Obviously, I like because for those below our work, we will have Doom coming, as we also have Doom coming this month, so there will be a Doom episode. But no, just looking at this and especially with kind of we've talked about this year and delays of game, but seeing companies, especially back then, delay game to do all this extra testing and starting out is great to see. Obviously, I like the pacing we talked about in Halo and stuff, and it's just fun seeing how that is incorporating game, because anybody that's ever done achievements or anybody that eventually learns these things in games, you can sit around and learn off a timer to do achievements if you need to kill certain things or do certain actions, or 2, you have things where you sometimes, especially I think in the Call of Duty ones where you learn in Halo, not necessarily Halo, but if we do go to Call of Duty later down the line and 5-6 years, where you get the timing where people just, you can't camp out because they just spawn infinitely, so you have to learn to move forward regardless. So seeing all this integral parts, it's pretty cool. And obviously the Quake engine is always fascinating.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit later on about how Valve took the Quake engine and kind of made it their own thing. But yeah, basing it off that Quake engine is super, super important for the development of just more than just Half-Life, of course. But what were we going to say, Kate?
I was just gonna say when you were explaining everything like that, it just made me think of what was it? Dark Quiet Death from Mythic Quest.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. A lot of my notes doing this, I was like, man,
This
this
is
makes me
Mythic
think
Quest.
about Mythic Quest.
Yep.
I literally have it later on when we're talking about the crowbar.
Yeah.
That's basically just the shovel. It's yeah, definitely. So after much testing and working out the unfun parts, Halo would be released in 1998 on PC, and for Matt, they did have a Dreamcast port in 2000. Don't know if you played that one. But
I did
there was
not.
a Dreamcast port.
I did know of it. I think I played a little bit of it, but I didn't own it. Well, actually, no, I didn't own that one. I did own a lot of games, but I don't think by then. But yes, once again, Dreamcast plugs for 2000 should always happen. We, as this podcast, are big fans of the Dreamcast, as in me, and that's all that matters.
What? Is that the official? Is that
I
the
didn't
official
have one. I'm sorry.
I didn't either. But I would like to know: is that the official console of this podcast? Apparently.
Yes.
Yeah, because Matt dubs it so. I mean, the port was there, but unfortunately, it's the PC success that carries it to over 50 Game of the Year awards and 9 million copies sold by its 10-year anniversary in 2008. Also, you got to like remember that not very many games can run Half-Life. And if you've looked at Half-Life graphics, like you might think, "Oh, these are gross," but at the time, it's pretty revolutionary stuff.
Yeah.
And a lot of the times it gets overshadowed by how great Half-Life 2 looks. But at the time in 1998, Half-Life 1 was it.
All I do is
again, Matt was playing basically pixelated characters on the screen playing sports games.
I was playing NFL 2K, which is also probably known as one of the best games of all time as far as sports games, which you can look that up with Randy Moss. Yeah.
Despite being a 2004 game, Half-Life 2 looks pretty good. Like, it doesn't look too bad. And that was even more revolutionary in terms of graphics than Half-Life 1 was. But I think a lot of it's because Half-Life 2 development begins basically 6 months after the first game releases. And they expand it to a team of 82. And it was the first time that Valve develops a game on their own in-house engine called Source, like we talked about earlier. And then in Half-Life 2, a player is returned back to the role of Gordon Freeman, but now the game is set 20 years in the future, and the Earth is now occupied by the Combine, a trans-dimensional race that exploited the events of the first game to invade Earth. Basically, in the first game, a bunch of like head crabs and a bunch of stuff invades Earth after a Black Mesa experiment, blah, 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 blah. But now you have these Combine people with like gas masks and stuff. But unfortunately, Half-Life 2 really doesn't have the same kind of smooth development as Half-Life 1, which, after like listening to this, listeners, remember, this is what happens in Half-Life 2. So just imagine what kind of development hell Half-Life 3 would go through.
No.
So Valve announced Half-Life 2 at E3 2003 with demonstrations of the characters, animation, and physics, and the reaction was positive, and the game won the E3 Game of the Show award before it's even released. So there's so much hype around it, kind of similar to what we see when we talk about Halo, when it, even just from the game's just basics, people are really, really excited about it. And then Newell announced the release date of September 30th, 2003. Remember, the game releases in 2004, so this doesn't happen. But he did that in hopes that it would motivate the team to kind of get the game done. The team worked long hours to meet the deadline, but by July, it was apparent that the game could not be met by that deadline. And then rumors started to spread of a delay, which we know now happens all the time, but back then, delays are a much bigger thing, and people get a lot more upset about delays. And then they were trying to push it to a holiday release, and that led to fan backlash and things of that nature.
Honestly, when I think about fan backlash, I think the first, and this is going to be different for everybody, but like, I think the first time that I ever remember like actually hearing the gamers suck like narrative because of how angry fans get, it was with Half-Life.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. And even so much so that Newell was hesitant to even announce a new release date after they pushed it back. He was quoted as saying, "We were paralyzed. We knew we weren't going to make the date we promised, and that was going to be a huge fiasco and really embarrassing. But we didn't have a new date to give people either." So basically, the graphics, and even like to add on to this, the graphics card manufacturer ATI, if you remember ATI from back in the day,
yes,
had arranged a...
I'm sorry, it was just one of those like,
oh, then Matt's awake.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I remember that. Had arranged a promotional event on Alcatraz to coincide with the planned release of Half-Life 2, and Newell was unable to pull off the event because the game wasn't ready. So he gave a speech, demonstrated the Source engine, and left without addressing questions.
Oh my
because
God.
he knew what backlash would occur through that.
Okay, thanks, bye!
Look at our game that we haven't finished yet. Sorry, bye. So in early October of 2003, the Half-Life source code was leaked online by a German hacker. And he had infiltrated the Valve's internal network like months earlier. A week later, he leaked a playable version of Half-Life 2 from that September, revealing how unfinished the game was, and the leaks damaged morale at Valve and slow development. And in 2004, he contacted Newell himself and identified himself, saying that he was just a fan and he did not act maliciously. And then Newell
Ooh.
worked with the FBI to invite the guy to a fake job interview, planning to arrest him in the USA. However, police arrested him in Germany, and then in 2006, he was sentenced to 2 years probation.
That's funny.
This dude leaked an entire game and then said, "No, bro, it's just because I love you."
It's also crazy to think, one, how many people would love to do that nowadays, and two, how much more secure, bunny quote, secure things have gotten from that point. Because, like, now they're just worried about people, like, taking videos of their demos or videos in, like, halls and stuff. And, like, I mean, I'm sure there is somebody at working security that's worried about the situation, but I feel like it's very much less so because of how the engines that they run off now versus that.
Yeah, for sure.
But, like, that's
It's
gonna
just crazy.
suck. I feel bad for product marketing managers when they have, like, an image get leaked. I don't even want to think about the whole game.
Yeah, they released the whole game.
God.
Yeah, it's just insane. Like, I don't even know how many people know that this happens. Like, when you think about or Half-Life 3, imagine all the people try to break in, try to leak that one to kind of
Yeah.
recreate what that guy did, because the internet's crazy, right? And they would probably want to be that guy who leaked Half-Life 3. So in 2004, the staff returned after Christmas to long hours, stressful working conditions, and no guarantee that the game, which was costing $1 million per month to develop, would be finished soon. Because Noel basically gave them an unlimited budget. He was like, "Here, all the money. Go make the best game ever." So they were spending money ridiculously. However, Noel felt that the progress was speeding up, and with the team producing about 3 hours of gameplay per month, in March, they created the first playable version from start to finish, and stopped production for a week to play through the game. The feedback from the company was overall positive, and after several months of bug fixes and playtesting, Halo was completed on October 13th, 2004.
Halo?
And a big thing that the big controversy around it is that they didn't release a beta. So even now to this day, like, why didn't they release a beta? Well, they didn't release a beta because all the stuff that they had to go through a year before the game was even finished. So of course
Nobody
they gave you
earned
guys
it.
a beta.
Nobody deserved a beta.
They hacked the beta.
don't
They already
deserve
played
one.
it.
Yeah, right. It was hacked. You played the beta, and it was garbage. Right? That's what betas are for. So Half-Life 2 was simultaneously released through Steam, CD, and DVD in several editions. Through Steam, and this was kind of like the start of you having to download external, software to like play the games and things like that, because you had to boot Half-Life 2 through Steam. They had 3 packages that customers can order from, and something I really wished the game market would do more. So you had the basic version that included Half-Life 2 and Counter-Strike Source, whereas the silver and gold versions included Half-Life Source, which is a port from the original Half-Life, Dave Defeat, which was a new mod to the engine, and then the collector's edition, the gold version, included merchandise, a shirt, and a strategy guide, and a CD containing the soundtrack used in Half-Life 2. So even if you bought the basic version, you were still getting more than just the game you were buying.
But what we need to do is we need to go back to strategy guides and soundtracks.
Yeah.
I'm tired of having to print out things and look at just you can look it up on the internet. And I'm like, you know how hard it is to play a game on your PC and then have to look things up on the internet.
I will say this, looking up stuff while playing Anno was almost impossible.
I
wasn't going to sacrifice my Real Housewives marathon at the same time to be able to open that third tab. That's all my computer could do.
I can't even have other tabs open when I play Apex. So give me some guides again. I just think it's really cool. They gave you different options, and the different options mattered. It wasn't just like, here's the game, and then this $100 more version gives you some in-game cosmetics. You got physical things with the game, and I miss that.
Well, I think Steam, at least PC version, still kind of do that. Obviously, like you said, I think it's gone more to they give you a lot more in-game cosmetics because obviously, as much as those quote unquote cost money, they're literally just quote unquote whatever. They're digital things. So, but no, I do think you can still get the collector's edition for a lot of game. But no, having the they still have bronze, silver, and gold, and I think a lot of the other games, especially ones that release, or at least I've seen quite a bit. Maybe not for everything. I think they're just now called deluxe editions more so
Yeah.
than the gold. But I just don't think. I think also they like bundle like season pass and content versus other games.
Yeah. But how many games these days give you like a whole other game though? Like they literally
Yeah. I
gave you
don't.
Counter-Strike Source, which is personally like my favorite version of Counter-Strike. But they just gave that to you with
That
the
was
rest of the
Adrian
game.
that said that, and not me.
Counter-Strike Source is amazing. Counter-Strike Go is only in the thing because they're not going to make more Counter-Strikes after this, probably. Counter-Strike Source was chef's kiss. If you played 1.6, you know that Counter-Strike Source was much, much better.
Sure. That was.
So, despite the production troubles, which there were many, the game was received even better than Half-Life 1, and then the expansions that they offered were a little bit better than Half-Life 1. That's debatable, but Half-Life Episode 1 took you through the perspective of Alyx, one of the playable character, or not playable characters, but one of the NPCs that you meet inside the game. And then Episode 2 returned you back to the perspective of Gordon Freeman. So actual expansions, but not without making you pay like a whole other big chunk for the rest of the games. And again, like Kate said, they put a lot of it into the orange box, which gave you a bunch of Valve games. And they said, here, play all of our stuff, which is, again, something I wish more companies would do.
Yeah.
It's
not
Game
through
of
just
the Year
Humble Bumble.
edition,
Like-
Adrian.
Like, I don't want
Oh.
Humble Bumble's great. Look, go buy stuff from our Humble Bumble and all that great stuff.
Or Humble Bumble.
But Humble
Bundle.
Bundle.
We're not a dating service.
But like the orange box was so damn cool because
It
you
was
got Half-Life 2,
cheap.
Episode 1, Episode 2, Portal, Team Fortress. Like those are all vastly different games, and they just gave it to you in one nice, finally done package.
Portal's one of my favorite puzzler games. I love platformers. I love platform puzzlers, and I love it when they're ridiculously hard. And I really love it when they're co-op. So Portal and Portal 2 are two of like my favorite games. And the orange box was really the reason that I picked up the first Portal and kind of fell in love. And also how I got to play the Half-Lives and how I got to play, and it was all because I wanted to play Team Fortress 2. So like I think one of the cool things, and I wish more companies did that now, is when you do bundle so many disparate games together, you are kind of like just letting somebody come into your brand. And a lot of the times if people walk around in your brand, they're gonna stay and they're gonna keep coming back, or they're gonna buy subsequent games. Which, like, especially when you're bundling older titles with newer titles, there really isn't anything to lose, and it's a very good way to build more brand loyalty. Because if I had just bought Team Fortress 2, I don't think I ever would have checked out Half-Life, or probably even Portal, maybe. But like that one thing served as a gateway. When Portal 2 came out, I bought it first day.
So I think the only problem is I do think they still do that. Just sadly, they don't give you the variety that we are talking about here. They give you, well, here's like in this case, they would have given you Half-Life 1, Half-Life 2.5, or Half-Life 2. They've given you all the older games within one franchise.
Yeah, like
So
the
you
Master
mentioned
Chief
like
Collection.
Anno. We can technically,
Oh,
you can
that's
buy a
fair.
bundle, but you're going to get all the previous only Anno games. You're only
Yeah.
going to get all the Assassin's Creed games. You're only going to get all the like Elder Scrolls games. And so while that is still good and great, but it's like you said, it keeps you invested in one franchise and you can follow that, but you do not get the variety that what you're referring to here of getting a Team Fortress, which is not really completely, but completely different game. You don't get a Portal and everything else.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's especially important for Valve too, because Valve, like, a lot of these games run off the same engine, and a lot of them work the same way. Like, the Portal gun that you use in Portal is basically the gravity gun that you use in Half-Life 2. Like, it's just them improving and doing different things. So, by giving, like Kate said, like, a more variety of games, you get people invested in the other franchises, and you're like, oh, wait, this plays like this thing. So maybe let me play this other thing that maybe not be a first-person shooter, but it's a puzzler game, but it has the same kind of mechanics. And yeah, I just wish they would do that more. As much as I like,
Oh, go ahead.
I was saying, much as I like the Master Chief Collection, like, give me other games with your thing.
Yeah.
You didn't like
'cause,
Halo
I think-
Wars?
So I think for me, like what, because I played Team Fortress first, and then I jumped to Portal, and then I got stuck in Portal, and I didn't want to stop playing games, but I only had Orange Box with me. I think I brought my Xbox to I think my mom's house, and it was because that was the game I was playing at the time. It just was what I stuck with because I was in college, and I couldn't afford a whole bunch of games. Um, and I was like, well, there are other games to play. Guess I'm gonna play Half-Life, and I like played it that nonstop that entire weekend. So like, it's just I don't know. It needs to come back. Bring it back.
Bring it back. Come on, Valve. Influence the industry and start making VR games.
Oh yeah.
They do influence
Just kidding.
the
We'll talk about
industry. They have Steam.
This is true. So before we get into the but why those, here some more on Podcorn.
So how long have we been trying to monetize our podcast?
I don't know. How long have we been around?
So for 3 years. But the cool thing is now we've done it with Podcorn, as you heard on the top of the show, which Matt found on a community Facebook page.
Yeah, I was digging around on our community Facebook page and saw that Podcorn's been apparently a hot thing these days. And for those of you who don't know, Podcorn is a marketplace connecting podcasters to amazing podcast sponsorship opportunities such as host-read ads, such as this one, interview segments, topical discussions, and more. Just basically jack of all trades.
The best thing about Podcorn is that there's no middleman. And honestly, one of the hardest things that we've experienced as a show is, although we're not super small, we're not Shea Serrano and The Ringer, and we're also not Conan O'Brien. So it's been really hard to kind of get our show out there, to get monetized, and to get sponsored. But the cool thing is podcasters of all sizes can browse and choose opportunities right on Podcorn's platform. They can also set their own rates and collaborate with brands directly without any exclusivities.
Unlike the other places where we just kind of place things and wait for hopefully somebody reaches out. But with Podcorn, we can just reach out directly.
So wait, after 3 years, it's that easy? We spent all this time, and it's been that easy?
Yeah, we went in and wrote a pitch, and I even got the chance to add a voice recording so they could get to know us, get to know how I talk, and kind of hear us out.
Yeah, what I like is that you never give up any of the rights to your podcast, and Podcorn is here to support you at every step and ensure you're protected and compensated for the work that you do for brands.
The cool thing is that the marketplace's mission is to give podcasters transparency, creative freedom, and full control over how and when they choose to monetize. So if you're working on moving your podcast game up, make sure you head to podcorn.com and make your account today and get started. Click the link in our show notes to sign up for Podcorn and start browsing all of your sponsorship opportunities.
So while basically the production history in itself is one big why, though, because it's just like this one company started by these two Microsoft people created this whole thing. I think the first thing that we have to talk about is kind of the overall success of the franchise. Because, like, looking at it, I think this might be one of the most highly rated series that we've covered. Because a lot of the times we look at games and we're like, oh, well, you know, some of these games were not good. Looking at you, Halo ODST. And they just weren't as good as some of the other games were. But both Half-Life 1 and Half-Life 2, kind of in their own respects, were very highly rated. And even down to some of the expansions that I'm not going to talk about. But Half-Life 1 itself, in 1998... was rated a 96 out of 100 on Metacritic, and then some other, bigger roles. So I think when GameSpot and IGN were kind of like the big players there, 9.4 out of 10 on GameSpot and a 9.5 out of 10 on IGN. Metacritic said it's not just the best game of the year, it's one of the best games of any year. An instant classic that is miles better than any of its immediate competition. And it is in its single player form, it's the best shooter since the original Doom, which becomes like a very kind of thing for Half-Life. A lot of these games that are coming out in terms of first person shooters, especially on PC, are kind of chasing this Doom model. And Half-Life is the first thing that kind of breaks away from that, which makes it, this highly rated in that sense. And you have other things like IGN said it's like the tour de force in game design, the definitive single player game in first person shooter. Next Generation said that it is a fast pace, it is dramatic, and it brings the very idea of adventure out of a PC, out of the Dark Ages and into the 3D world. All of that with not a single orc in sight, because 1998 you have a lot of EverQuest, and PC games are kind of focused more on
Yeah.
the MMORPG at this time.
Yes.
But Half-Life says, hey, look, first-person shooters are still a thing, and it can be more than just Doom or Quake.
Yeah, which I guess kind of tail on that, as you keep mentioning Doom, which I guess another spoiler, we will be going more into these Doom clones, but at least from what I know from here, like, this is where we get the first definition of first-person shooter. Because
Yeah.
everything before that was literally just Doom clone, Doom clone, Doom clone, and they were just like, well, this is not really necessarily just a Doom clone. This is so great, we can't just say like this is obviously rivaling Doom, so we're not going to name it after. And so this is kind of like when we get the first, as you said, the definite of like the development of the genre of first person shooter.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, this game this game runs, so Halo can sprint, basically. And
Yeah.
we talk a lot in our Halo episode, if you listen to it for our live episode, it was a lot of like, well, Halo didn't do this first, but it did it, better. And a lot of that comes from Half-Life kind of doing it first, and then and Halo kind of improving on it to kind of be like the next definitive shooter. Like,
which is cool. I guess it's going to be cool for this year because we are going to get Doom, which kind of starts this or whatever.
Yeah,
and then we get to
sure.
like basically they stand up for Half-Life to start walking, for Halo to start sprinting.
Yeah, basically. And then you have Half-Life 2, which comes out in 2004. That's why I want to preface this by the kind of year that 2004 is in terms of games. 2004 is the same year that World of Warcraft, Far Cry, Doom 3, Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, Halo 2, Ninja Gaiden, and Fable all came out.
You
That
also
is
have,
a
Just-
giant year.
no, it
Just
is
to preface this.
Yeah, it's a great year. We also get it's also I think it's right coming. It's in the year we have one of the best Madden games as well that comes out, Madden 05, which is revered.
Nobody cares about your sports games, Matt.
I'm sorry.
Which one was Madden 05?
The one with Ray Lewis on it.
Oh, yeah, you're right. I had this one.
Yeah.
Gosh, Matt, you're just a fake gamer boy. All you
But no,
play is
it does get
sports.
Half-Life 2 because obviously you brought up some, but I know there's other ones of like it just gets drowned out.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's so many games that come out this year that are like highly regarded. Like we've talked about Fable multiple times. I'm sure there'll be a Grand Theft Auto episode at some point. We're having a Doom episode here pretty soon. We did a Halo episode. Ninja Gaiden is phenomenal. Like there's really, really great games that come out this year. But Half-Life 2 comes out and just like blows a lot of them out of the water. So for its rating, Metacritic 96 out of 100. And by 2004, you have much more people like rating games and things like that. But I think some of the biggest ones here, IGN rates it a 9.7 out of 10. Maximum PC rates it 11 out of 10. I don't even know how you even do that, but they did it. Half-Life 2 itself earned 39 Game of the Year awards, including Overall Game of the Year at IGN, GameSpot's Award for Best Shooter, GameSpot's Reader's Choice, PC Game of the Year from the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences, and Best Game with the Game Developers Choice Awards, where it is also given various awards for technology, characters, and writing, and voiceovers, and like BAFTA awards, and all that kind of
Literally
things.
everything.
Literally everything in the same year that we have World of Warcraft, Far Cry, Doom 3, Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, Halo 2, Ninja Gaiden, and Fable.
Star
which are
Wars
all,
Battlefront comes out this year too.
Yeah, Star Wars Battlefront. Like you have so many heavy hitters coming out, and Half-Life just kind of sweeps it and takes all the awards. And interesting to kind of note, because we talked about Guinness the World Records a couple of times on the show, it awarded Half-Life 2 the world record for highest rated shooter by PC Gamer Magazine in the Guinness World Records Gamers Edition in 2008. So 4 years after the game even came out. So when we get to, like Matt had mentioned earlier, so Doom is kind of like the predecessor to basically every major FPS game we have. Half-Life 2 is kind of the next step in that redefinition. So you have Doom in 1993 and then Half-Life 1 primarily in 1998. So while Half-Life 2 is probably the game that people have played more and probably remember more, at least for kind of like our age range, just based on when it came out, Half-Life 1 is actually the one that has all the achievements. So we're going to kind of focus on that as the kind of redefining moments. Half-Life 2 really just improves on the things that happened in Half-Life 1. But I think because of the leaping graphics, the situation gets a little misremembered on which one
Yeah.
is the better game. Personally, I like Half-Life 1 a little bit better just because the replayability is much better in Half-Life 1. But Half-Life 1 really escapes that Dune clone label, and it just does it in a couple of major ways. So the first one is it provides a little bit more realism in just kind of subtle ways. So one, the guns just aren't floating around. They're in logical places. So you just don't get a bazooka from the scientist lounge area. Like, you don't get things from there.
Question. Was Duke Nukem a Doom clone?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Sorry. It was funny because the gun floating around didn't make me think of Doom. It made me think of Duke Nukem.
Duke Nukem is highly inspired from Doom.
Yeah, Duke Nukem is also
Highly
a very great game.
inspired.
Yeah. Yeah.
So another big reason or another way that it kind of invokes a little bit more realism is that you have the ability to kind of tackle the maps more or less in your own way. While there's like a kind of railroad system, it's much less like kind of defined, where you get to explore the map a little bit more. You get to go and visit different rooms because each area of the game's map felt like a place that existed for a purpose. So even if it didn't directly impact your path in the game in a notable way, it's still there. So there were break rooms, there was labs next to labs where they were studying similar subjects, and numerous instances of objects and environment events that made Black Mesa's facility feel like an actual real place. It just wasn't just room and then a bathroom and then another hallway. Like, there was multiple labs, there was bathrooms, there was just more things that make it feel like it was an actual place, which kind of was a little bit different than you just running through random areas shooting demons in the face, which is fun, but doesn't invoke that same kind of realism that Half-Life does in 1998. Another big piece of this is the ability that Half-Life invokes puzzles into its game. So many of the FPS games released after Doom kind of followed that same kind of playbook in terms of puzzles and non-combat obstacles. So basically, you're finding a key or a pass card, then you're going on to the next area, and you have to like find the thing, and that usually involves you shooting a lot of people in the face. It's a simple way to throw in some hurdles without forcing the player to drop combat for too long, but obviously isn't a big kind of puzzle part of the game that you see in Half-Life.
I will say this, kind of like the quicksand thing, I thought growing up that pass cards and key cards would be a bigger part of my life than they are.
Yes! Yes!
As much we talk about the quicksand thing of like, man, I always thought I was going to be danger from all the quicksand I saw growing up. Key cards and pass cards were also another thing that I thought I was going to know a lot more about that I realized.
So, like, I thought that they were going to be cooler. Because, like, at my job, we have to use a badge for literally any door I go through that has another layer of the office, I have to use a badge. But it's not cool. They don't, like, retinal scan me. I don't have to, like, swipe it. I just use my little lanyard and it stretches off of it and it goes, geek. And that's it. It's not cool. That was my bamboozle. I thought it was going to be cool.
Yeah, but if like Matt or I needed to get in there, we have to find you and kill you and get your key card and then get into the building.
So we
That's
need to go to the
fun part.
Floating kitchen to find the weapon to come back.
That's the problem. You're the person with the badge. Matt and I are the people who need to find the person with the badge. That's the harder part. But Half-Life does things a little bit differently. Again, like, you're a theoretical physicist who went to MIT. So not all problems are solved with you shooting things. Some of the things require puzzle solving. So the most obvious example of its approach to a better class of puzzle design is the infamous sequence with where you basically have to find your way to launch a missile in order to kill a basically unbeatable enemy that's attracted to sound. So you're basically incorporating stealth, multi-step solutions, and like dash horror-based tension to like kill things in Half-Life 2. It's not just you can't shotgun everything and you can't just run past stuff. You have to find a way to activate this lever here. Oh wait, that lever didn't work. Let me go activate this other lever while you're fighting these enemies. So a little bit different and kind of changes the mold. Now, I mean, they're kind of easy to kind of go through, but at the time, when you see an NPC kind of walk through and get one shot by this, this enemy, it kind of lets you know and kind of informs you on like, hey, like this thing requires more than you shooting it. You have to figure out a way to kind of sneak by it and find out what solutions work where.
Yeah.
And then past that, you have the AI in the game. So again, Valve basically reroutes the script from the Quake engine, like we talked about before, to make enemies smarter. So enemies in Half-Life talk to each other, they move around, they'll flank you, they'll run away from grenades, a lot like we see in Halo Combat Evolved, but basically 3 years before it happens. So another big part of this too
So before we get to the
is
storytelling part, or as you're going to, can we talk about? I just want to mention a little bit about Quake because we've been talking about Quake Engine, we've been talking about Doom, and we just forget that Quake actually gets released.
Yeah.
Quake gets
well,
forgotten.
Quake, yeah, I mean 1996.
Well, I
and
know,
they
but it's just funny
basically
because
sets the
like
engine.
I think people skip over Quake so much because we go Doom to Half-Life, and Quake is actually in there and does a lot of stuff, including this Quake engine, but it never gets talked about.
I forget about Quake until we go to QuakeCon, and that's the only thing to watch.
I mean, if I'm being completely honest, I played Duke Nukem and Quake way more than I played Doom when I was a
played
kid.
Doom and Duke Nukem.
I played a lot of Quake.
I played
a lot of Unreal Tournament. Like, I played a lot of Quake.
But yeah, no, it's just funny because obviously I did want to mention just because like obviously we will end up getting back, but it's just funny because Quake is groundbreaking in its own way, but it gets skipped over so much and people forget about it all the time.
Half-Life remembers Quake because they took their product and they changed it to make their own game. So moving on from there, so I mean, if you guys remember Duke Nukem, Quake, and Doom, not a lot of story there.
Nope.
Not a lot. But what Half-Life does is that the game is like largely show don't tell, and the game is basically told within the game.
Yeah.
There's no cutscenes at all, no background information. Again, you enter in this game basically a guy checking into work. You're on a train, going through the train, and you land, and you hear all these like background things, kind of like how Portal kind of doesn't really tell you what's going on in Portal but it kind of tells you while you're playing the game.
Yeah.
That's a lot of that. You never see Gordon Freeman's face outside of like the, material on the, back in the day when you had to like physically buy your games. His face was there and his face was on the menu, but in the game, you never see his face and he never speaks. And you are basically thrown into this, figuring out Earth and the alien planet, and you see everything play out kind of around you, and really provides a cohesive story without really telling you any exposition or having any cutscenes, which now in like this day and age sounds ridiculous not to have any cutscenes or kind of any expository exposition to kind of build out a world. And it not only lends to Half-Life 2 20 years in the future, but it also leads to the expansions for Half-Life 1 and kind of allows them to give you a different perspective. So Half-Life Opposing Forces puts you in the shoes of a U.S. Marine during the Black Mesa incident, because what happens in Half-Life 1, incident happens, and then the government, doing what the government does, sends a bunch of Marines to clean up the situation. So in Opposing Forces, you take the place of one of the Marines who's trying to kill and figure out what's going on at Black Mesa. And then Half-Life Blue Shift puts you in the shoes of a facility security guard who is seeing all this stuff happen and is like, wait, I'm just a regular dude, and all this stuff is going on. So they make a very considered effort to kind of build the area around you, even with some of the expansions to let you know, give you different perspectives on what is actually happening in this crazy, crazy situation.
I actually feel real bad about myself, and I feel like I need to turn in my Stephen King card for not realizing the similarities between The Mist and this game.
Well, yeah, I mean, I figured. I mean, I've been on record that I think the Mist movie is terrible.
It's
the books
not.
is good.
It's beautiful.
The Mist movie is terrible.
You just don't like sad endings.
And I hate it.
You just don't like sad endings.
But I figured you'd be able to see some similarities as you
Yes.
kind of went through it. Do you want to talk about a little bit of them? I mean, the book's been out forever, so.
Well, yeah. I mean, the main thing is really just like the military aspect. So, like, specifically the fact that it's happening during the Black Mesa, like the setting, the stuff that's hiding from you. I mean, it's just kind of like, I guess more setting is what fits it versus like actual like story, if that makes sense. So like all of it feels like The Mist, but I don't know. I don't know if that makes sense. I'm gonna stop talking.
I mean, that makes sense to Myst fans, to you people who think that that's a good story.
It's a good story.
Just kidding. I'm
It's a
kidding.
good story.
But yeah, it's a lot of that. It's that first game is really nothing's really told to you really at all. You just like walking around. All these scientists are telling you that stuff is going wrong. You get transported to an alien planet. Sometimes, yeah, it's just craziness. But it's just done so well, and they kind of put everything kind of in the background for you to kind of see that it all unfolds in a really satisfying manner. And then the last thing to talk about real quickly for Half-Life 1 is just kind of the weapon system. And it's just introduction of just not stereotypical at this time kind of weapons. So Half-Life introduces the Crowbar, which is the earliest and clearest declaration away from like that weapon wheel kind
Yeah.
of perspective. And despite it being the first weapon you receive in the game, you end up using the crowbar constantly throughout Half-Life, whether it's for breaking boxes or smashing head crabs. And when I think about it, it reminds me a lot of the shovel again in Mythic Quest. And I wonder if it had the same kind of like, life of the shovel in Mythic Quest. Like when they said, "Hey, let's put a crowbar into the game that you use a lot." Like if they have the same kind of issues with that. If you haven't seen Mythic Quest, go do an Apple TV for a week and go watch it. It's really good.
I was gonna say, but can you draw a dick with a crowbar?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't think you can. I mean, maybe if you like smashed against the wall, you might be able to draw a dick with a crowbar. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, that might be a thing you can do. And then the weapon system, of course, we've kind of talked about this before when we talked about Halo, where they kind of let you use weapons that make the most sense to you. So, with the exception of like you replacing the pistol early on, you can basically use most any gun in the game throughout it, and it's really more based on situation. So, using a rocket launcher against a helicopter instead of using like a pistol, using trip mines in places that require you do a little bit more clever movement, and using a shotgun against big monsters and not using it against soldiers who are trying to like hit you from across like the way. There's not like a once you pick this weapon up, it's going to be the weapon you use for the rest of the game. It's a more clever way of kind of trying to get away from that. Wait till you get the machine gun kind of style of using weapons.
And I really like that mechanic in games. Like the fact that you have to make me think about what I'm gonna use and how I'm gonna use it is something that makes the games way more immersive. It's something that Resident Evil does, but I also like that Resident Evil also does it with ammo. So like I can shoot this thing with incendiary ammo all I want, but it's not actually gonna damage it. Like that kind of thing. So like I think that mechanic is something that like is underrated, I guess, a little bit to me.
Yeah, and also something that like nowadays we kind of just see that as like a thing,
Yeah.
right? Like we just take that as like face value of like, oh, you can just use whatever gun you really want. But back then it was more the rocket launcher kills things much faster. So just use that all the time. I don't know if you use rocket launchers in your sports games, Matt, back in 1998, but in
My
Half-Life,
quarterback always had a rocket arm because you just threw it up and you just jumped with Randy Moss and he caught it over everybody.
quality. So just real quick for Half-Life 2 when it comes to kind of its redefining of FPS. Half-Life 1 does, again, spark a lot of things, but Half-Life 2 did a little bit of some revolutionary things. So the first and foremost being that it took a much deeper dive into the characters. In Half-Life 1, you're just kind of running around with just these character models of the same scientists over and over again, who are basically there just to like get eaten, so you know not to go that way. Half-Life 2 does give you more characters to care about. And again, like some of the episode 1 is based on Alyx. The new game that's coming out at the end of this month is based on Alyx as well. Um, and then I think the much bigger part is just kind of like the physics and graphics engine that Halo or Half-Life 2 introduces. So at E3 2003, Valve showed the G-Man, the white guy in the suit, in Half-Life 2 in contrast to Half-Life 1, and it's really not even close. Like it's just this revolutionary kind of design from one game to the next in, just a short period of time. The facial expressions, the movement, the really showed that like Valve is really moving the needle on graphics with their own engine. And in that, you have Valve doing much better things in the physics department with the game. So the gravity gun being the best example, you can pick things up and then just drive them straight into your enemies. You can pick up a can and just shoot it right in someone's face. You can pick up like one of those explodey pipe things and blow people up. Or you can use the gravity gun to lift things to help you solve puzzles. It's a much better kind of uh, take in that you can do more things when you have better graphics and better materials to use. And I'll also say that I think this is one of the sequels that you can definitely pick up without having played Half-Life 1
Yeah.
because of the way that they kind of continue that storytelling model of, show, don't tell. So if you're coming into the game, you're 20 years in the future from Half-Life 1, so you can basically either see the world how it changes from the first game, or you can just follow the story as it plays out, just like a normal game. But because either way, you're showing what's being happened. So someone who has background is getting the same information of 20 years later that someone who is played the game since 1998 all the way up to 2004, which I think is something that we don't see very much. I know when I tried to play Gears 5, I had to go back and figure out what happened in the other games, which isn't always the most fun thing. It's the reason why I don't play Assassin's Creed's game, because I'm just too far past what's going on in that series. But Half-Life 2 at least gave you kind of here, anyone can play this game, no matter how popular Half-Life 1 was.
I will say I'm looking at some of these stills from Half-Life 2, and they're not bad. They're obviously not what we have now, but they're not bad at all.
I would argue that's better than some games that we see now. This is better than some games that we saw on Xbox 360, some better games that we see at original Xbox, PlayStation 4 level.
Yeah.
They're not bad at all.
I will say, obviously, it's nice to have the little perspective thing. Obviously, there is value in games. I obviously love Assassin's Creed, so having it pick up continuing right there versus jumping years ahead, because I think you do sometimes get weird gaps. But obviously, if you can do it properly, it ends up working out well. So I can see the value in both ways doing it, because obviously it's a nice way, especially because, like I said, this is a nice way to get both communities, new and old. So as long as it works out well, it's good. But I do see the value. I will still always value things like Assassin's Creed and Gears, except for when they do it 20 years later, and then you're in actual real time, and you're oh, I was in middle school when this came out or something.
Yeah.
That makes sense. So moving on from there, kind of the FPS things that it does. Another big thing, and probably the thing that makes Valve the most money, is the modding part of what Half-Life does. So Doom, of course, will always hold a special place in PC gaming history as the FPS title that helped make modeling mainstream. However, Half-Life has exact contributions to the mod scene that are basically often overlooked, and it's crazy considering the fact that Counter-Strike, arguably the most popular FPS game, one of the most watched esports games, started as basically just a Half-Life mod back in the day. And this really comes from Valve giving the community their engine and letting them go nuts. And this is both in Golden Source, that Valve modified model from Quake, and their own source model that they use for Half-Life 2 to create all of these different games. So, of course, Counter-Strike, essentially a mod for Half-Life 1. It was so good that Valve actually hired the duo who developed it to kickstart the Counter-Strike series. And now, again, Counter-Strike is one of the biggest esports around the world. And it all started from just two guys who modded Half-Life 1. Quake Team Fortress was originally a game that used Quake existing weapons, and Quake Team Fortress began with 5 playable classes that eventually grew to 9. And the 3 creators, again, were hired by Valve to basically create Team Fortress, and then again Team Fortress 2 based on the mods that they did. So if you're listening, Valve just takes what people do and then just makes it better.
Well, but it's really cool.
I was going to say, the fair thing is they at least hire them. The problem we have nowadays is now companies just take the mods and say, we don't know who you are.
Yeah.
Well, didn't it happen with Dota? Because Dota was a mod.
Yeah, Dota's a mod, but also still through Valve.
Yeah, no, so I was saying, because I think initially what happened with Dota, they didn't get hired initially. They just started adapting the mod, and then they got hired years later or something like that.
That probably follows. It's pretty early on in Valve's career.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
But I know a lot of the MOBAs came out of mods, right?
Yeah, I mean, all the MOBAs we have are basically because of Dota.
Yeah.
And that weird mod there. Mods are crazy. Because you also have Gary's mod, which is basically a Half-Life 2 mod, which when if you look at the history of like mods and games, is probably the most sandboxy mod game there is. If you're not familiar, it's basically a physics-based sandbox game that really has no objectives. It just like lets players spawn non-playable characters and ragdolls and props, lets you interact and video them, and it basically allowed players to make their own mods, machinima, and all kinds of things that really hadn't been seen before. It's basically like red versus blue, but on crack. Is basically like what Gary's
That's
mod is,
awesome.
and there's supposedly a Gary's Mod 2 coming out later this year. We don't really have any confirmation on it, but it basically sold over 10 million copies with its mod, and it just let people go crazy. But again, all spawned off of Valve's Half-Life 2 source engine. And then
Oh,
even
my
for the
brother plays this thing.
yeah, it's crazy. It's like Minecraft and
Correct.
Skyrim mods had a baby, but like in 2004.
Yeah.
And then even for both games themselves, outside of all these other mods, there's been a lot of mods to the original games that have really modernized them, updated their graphics, and even for some of them updated their gameplay to change the way that the games feel and kind of continue that replayability. Even if you're worried about kind of going back and playing these games, there have been updates to them to make them better to play even now in 2020. Some of them not as good. Like people really don't like the cinematic version of Half-Life 2 where you get cutscenes and things like that because it just kind of changes the way the game feels. But they're there if you want to play them because mods.
Mods are fascinating. I love mods. They're great. They definitely extend the shelf life of games. Obviously, today's day and age of mods is also really weird because it's not kind of like you get hired, and obviously, depending on how things go, like obviously, I still play Morrowind, and people who literally modded that game. It's still kind of highly played just because of all the mods. They've actually had people like redo the entire like graphics setting of it, so you can actually play with like upgraded graphics up to like 2008 or something like that, 2012, and so. But that's the only thing. Like I like PCs. I mean, I like my consoles, but PCs will always be, in this aspect, way better just because of you can extend and fix things in games that are broken just by having community mods. Obviously, there's both positive and negative effects, but no, just having the ability to change just things you dislike and add things that you think would be great are awesome.
Yeah, you don't want Thomas the Choo Choo Train in Skyrim.
Oh
still
no,
terrifying.
not that thing.
The thing is
No.
terrifying. But no, there's a lot of them I use. Like obviously Fallout does it great because as much as or like 4, I know people don't really like it, but I actually enjoy building, and so with some of the mods, you can actually expand on the building because it's great for what they had in the game, but it is eventually after a while a very limiting aspect where you couldn't have like more than 20 people. Then you can put a mod. Now you get 50 people. Now you get new stuff. Now you can expand your building things, and it just adds elements of continuing games on, which obviously Bethesda hates because they don't make any more money off their game. But still, for actual players, mods are great.
Yeah, they're great and they worked really well. I mean, it spawns so many games outside of that. I mean, mods basically make Day of Defeat, they make Counter-Strike, they make Ricochet, they make so many games based off just the mods that Valve was like, hey, this is good. Come make it for us. And even from there, I mean, like I said before, Portal is basically a lot of the same things that happens in Half-Life 2, but just done in a different way to kind of, even the storytelling basis of
Yeah.
Portal is a lot of what they do in Half-Life. So they know what they do well and they keep making that thing. And I know we're kind of running short on time here, but I think something to talk about is the way that Valve makes their games and they do the Cabal process. And just a very short kind of rundown of it is that Valve just wanted to make games differently. So from the start of Half-Life 1, they wanted to move forward with a unifying design kind of team. So they created a Cabal. It's just essentially it's just a group of 6 individuals from across all departments that work together primarily for 6 months straight in 6-hour meetings, 4 days a week. The Cabal was responsible for all elements of game design, including level layouts, key elements, enemy designs, narrative, and the introduction of gameplay elements relative to the story. The collaboration provided successful, and once the Cabal had come to decisions on types of gameplay elements that would be needed, mini Cabals formed from other departments that were most affected by the choice and were formed to implement these elements. And membership in the main Cabals rotated since commitment required would create burnout. So they really kind of like took people from all aspects of the company, put them together on like a actual cohesive team, and use that feedback to implement into uh, things that made the game more fun. So we talked about at the beginning where they try to make the games more fun. A lot of that comes from them working within the Cabal with one designer saying, "Hey, this is cool." Playtester saying, "Hey, this isn't cool," and them kind of working together to kind of make that. I think it's something that seems very kind of like intuitive, but at the time, it's something that a lot of people didn't do. They kind of like broke up these departments, didn't let them really talk a whole bunch. But Valve really wanted to make it a cohesive unit, so much so that they used the same design in Team Fortress 2 and then used it again in Half-Life 2, even when they expanded their team out from like 10 to 86. Very interesting, and again makes me kind of think of again Mythic Quest, where Mythic Quest's like whole dynamic is kind of like the competing interests of all these different entities in the gaming development thing, but it would be solved if they just had a nice cabal to kind of work out of.
Open office. You can look at each other.
Yeah. And then I guess the last thing that we should talk about just real quick is Half-Life Alyx, because 17 years since the last Half-Life game, Half-Life Episode 2, I believe, instead of giving us Half-Life 3, like I'm sure everyone would want, and it would end all the Valve memes of them not being able to count to 3 and 86 years later and blah, 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 blah. We're still getting Half-Life Alyx later this month. And Half-Life Alyx takes place before the events of Half-Life 2, and players control Alyx Vance, who is a prominent character in Half-Life 2 and the main character in Half-Life 2 Episode 1. That's a mouthful, the more that I say it. And her father, Eli Vance, who are fighting the occupying aliens, the Combine. It's basically described as Valve's flagship VR game. And from what I was reading, it's like they're putting a lot of like stock into this. It's like this game is going to save VR as a platform. Valve
it can't
or
save
Half-Life
a platform
Alyx
that has no people on it.
Well,
that's how you save it.
That's how you save it.
You get people to the platform.
Exactly. So Half-Life Alyx is being developed with the Source 2 engine, so Valve's new engine, and is compatible on all PC VR headsets. So they'll be able to interact with the environment and fight enemies using gravity gloves to manipulate objects, similarly to the gravity gun in Half-Life 2. Traditional elements from the series will be returning, such as exploration, puzzles, and physics-based combat. And it's going to be supported on all VR headsets, like I said. So the Valve Index, HTC Vive, Oculus Rift, Oculus Quest, and Windows Mixed Reality, which I didn't
always
know
forget that HTC is still around, and all they do is make a VR thing.
Yeah, I had HTC phones forever.
That's what I'm saying. So did I. Then they disappeared.
And they disappeared. And then the gameplay was designed around VR. Valve said that they had no plans to make a non-VR version, so you get what you get. And again, like all the other Half-Life games and basically all the other Valve games, it'll also support user mods via the Steam Workshop. Look, I'm not sure if I'll ever get to play this game because I don't have VR equipment, and I don't know if I can talk my wife into buying VR headset stuff for the kind of games that are out there. But I looked through some of the gameplay, the stuff that's up as of this episode, because there's really not that much. It looks kind of cool. And this might be the future of VR because it looks pretty immersive, man. It looks pretty good. You shoot stuff. It feels like, I don't know. I played some VR games and they just seem like still kind of gimmicky and kind of VR-y, where you have to like, press
a VR game
forward.
sounds VR-y.
Like VR in terms of like what we have now, right? Like where you defuse the bomb or like you make the cake. Like
So
it's just very kind of like
a few VR games that have things that aren't just defuse the bomb and make the cake and like stuff like that. Like there's one with swords and like fighting giants, and then like there's a whole bunch of other stuff.
So you played Fruit Ninja?
No, like an actual no, it's not Fruit Ninja. Shut up. All this was to say, why am I defending it? All this is to say they all feel off. Even when they're like really immersive and they're going to make you feel like you're there. And I've played a lot at cons, and I've never had one that I was like, I'm gonna go buy a VR set. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, but did Valve make any of those? Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it'll work. Again, I probably won't buy one because I don't have like the drive to. But like, look at the gameplay. It looks like you're playing Half-Life in VR.
Cool.
And that's much different than like the Star Wars VR game that I've played, where like I'm just holding a lightsaber and I'm deflecting things, but I don't feel like a goddamn Jedi. But in this, you feel like you're
That is what
actually.
Star Wars Kinect is for, sir.
Oh my god!
So
no, it's not.
I played. You know what VR is good for? Beat Saber. That is about it. Or the Beat Saber knockoffs. Those are fun, but they're not worth buying a VR. I honestly think this thing's gonna bomb. I think Valve just makes a ton of money off of Steam, and so they're gonna try something new to possibly save this thing. Because Microsoft's already said they do not care about VR themselves. I don't know where VR is going. I think where VR is going to be part of our future. I don't think it will be in gaming. It might be wrong, but they also told me connecting the little PlayStation wand or whatever that thing was.
PlayStation Move, the big
was going to be part of my future, and both of those are all gone.
PlayStation Move's still around.
Hey man, Sims 5 is coming out with VR, right?
That's called real life, sir.
Right,
that is a terrible idea. That is a terrible idea, but it will keep VR afloat. Just from The Sims.
Yeah. Because the big thing too, right? Like I know when like they did the Fallout VR, I was like, oh snap, Fallout VR, and then it just didn't happen.
Did you play the Resident Evil one though?
I played the Resident Evil one on the PlayStation, and it didn't feel like VR. It just gave me a headache. It also could be because I was drinking a little bit before I did it, so that might not have helped too much. But it's different than like doing like the Dark Souls-y Oculus game that they have, like where you're shooting skeletons and stuff.
You know what's going to happen?
But this feels different.
Break their TVs, falling over, trying to play this game. That's all we're going to get. You remember the Wii?
The Wii memes
when everybody's throwing their stuff at the TV. All we're going to get, instead of throwing their controllers, they're going to fall face first in the TV. That's all we're going to get from this.
I don't know.
I think I also just have a natural bias because I'm so used to wearing glasses that I get really motion sick when I either watch stuff through my glasses or I have to take them off. So I think I'm just naturally biased against VR because I get very sick if I'm in it for too long.
That's fair.
So
VR has not made a game that I just give a crap about. And until they make it affordable, they can make it reasonable where I don't need to clean out my entire house to be able to play it. And it's not something like, as Adrian said, I go choo-choo, choo-choo with my lightsaber, and I just go ping-ping or whatever like I'm playing Pong. I just don't care.
Yeah.
And out of all the games that they could have made, that Valve has made over the years, why?
Because I think you said, they just have...
They got Steam. They got money.
They just have that FU money where there's like, we're going to do whatever we want, and we know you'll buy it. Because like the video, their trailer had, 10 million views in 24 hours? They don't care.
I know they don't. Like I said, they got Steam rolling in. They don't care. They made Artifact, and it died, and they're going to make this. And it's probably going to die, but they're probably going to make some...
And it doesn't matter because they control 90% of all PC game sales.
Yep.
And it's fine because
each game.
Look, even if you're not going to play Half-Life Alyx, like I probably won't until I go to my uncle's house and he has it there. It's okay because at least until March 23rd, Valve, the gracious PC gods that they are having all prior Half-Life series games free to play on Steam from January 2020, which is right now, until Half-Life Alyx comes out. So even if you don't care about any of this VR stuff, but you're like, hey, I kind of want to go play the Half-Life games, you can go play them for free right now on Valve.
That's really cool, actually. That's really
cool. Thank you, PC overlords. Yeah, well, by the time this episode comes out, you'll have 3 weeks or 2.5-ish weeks to play this series, at least Half-Life 1 and Half-Life 2 in its entirety. If you don't play any of them, I would recommend doing Half-Life 1. If you're worried about graphics, I would probably say playing Black Mesa is probably going to be your best bet, because Black Mesa is like the graphics updated version of Half-Life 1. But even Half-Life 1, I think, has a lot of replayability factor, even in 2020 to a 1998 game. But that's really all I got. The game's been around for a long time, and people still love it, are still modding it, and it's probably one of the biggest FPS games to kind of change the franchise of FPS since, again, Doom, which you'll hear about very soon.
Yeah.
Final thoughts? Matt?
It's one of those games. I know I missed it during the time that it came out. I remember like I said, coming out in 2004 and all the craziness. Um, it's another one of those. I know this is a revolutionary game. I know it changed a lot of the genre stuff. I didn't know quite exactly how much per se, but I knew like if there's games to find things, Half Life will always be in there. It's just something that I've just never either had time or did something else to ever play. But it's one of those you always know the importance of it.
What about you, Kate?
I don't really have anything else to say, honestly. Like, I think everybody should play it at least once, one of the games, like whatever. Because I do think that it has really good gameplay, and I would like to play it again if I have time. I don't think I do, but I would love to, especially since it's all free. But I do think specifically, I still see Half-Life stuff at cons now, and they haven't done anything in years.
I mean,
It's
look,
an excellent business model.
So
people
like,
still love Valve and they haven't done anything in years.
I know.
Not that what they did wasn't great, but it was not like I said, they haven't done anything. Dota is how old now? Counter-Strike is how old now?
Dota 2 still brings in the most
Yeah,
like, money from esports games.
Half-Life
It's
is
crazy.
how old? Hell, even Left 4 Dead is how old? Like, outside of Artifact, that was like why everybody went crazy when Artifact came out, because Valve hasn't done anything for like 20 years, pretty much.
I think it speaks to the quality of their games.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's all I got. We're like way over time. And Half-Life, if you play Half-Life Alyx and you have a VR headset and all that stuff, hit us up. Let us know on the Twitters if it's good enough to buy. And I might be able to talk my wife into buying a $700 VR headset.
You know,
I
buy
saw
the
what
25
happened. I saw what happened when you bought a tiger.
It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. It'll just be set up one day and that you can't say anything. But I'm relying on you, Twitter universe, to help me make that decision.
Tell her it's exercise.
That's all I got. You can take us out of here, Kate, before I get into more trouble.
Well, if you like what you heard and you want to support us a little bit more, head on over to patreon.com/butwhythepc, where you get access to our episodes early and all of our research notes. Additionally, you can find us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, everywhere at ButWhyThoughtPC if you want to get involved in the conversation. And you can follow me on Twitter at OMammothRandier. Adrian?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at SuperRuiz93, SUPERRUIZ 93.
Matt?
The cake is a lie.